Okay, everybody, David Parsons here. Welcome to Nostalgia Trap with my good friend Justin Rogers Cooper. Good to see you, Justin.
Nice to see you too. How are you?
Good. We are reacting to the news a lot on News Trap this week. Talked a lot about a lot of different things. But one of the things I was thinking about coming into the show today was the robot dogs that you sent a picture of China putting the like AR-15 on top. And I was thinking like at some point, like there will be probably in our lifetime someone killed by a robot dog. I don't know if that has happened yet. Who would be the first person actually killed in combat by a robot dog? But then I remembered and I looked it up on Wikipedia. I don't know if you remember this, but like during the height of the Black Lives Matter sort of like protests, there was a shooting in Dallas where like a sniper killed like five cops, and then he went to hide like in a warehouse somewhere. And the Dallas Police Department killed him with a robot that was like a robot bomb. And it was noted on Wikipedia as the first case of like the police using a robotic bomb to kill a suspect. And so he might qualify, but not quite robot dog.
Well, I guess I await that future headline as well.
Yeah.
But it'll I was gonna say it's if it's I don't know where China's gonna operate the dog. I
Yeah,
don't
are there like
maybe
legions of dogs being constructed right now that there's just like
yeah.
going to be like hordes of these dogs roaming the earth with
I guess
guns
they'll
on
be
them?
like, and in surprising news today, as China sent its fifth fleet up to Taiwan and continuing war games with the United States, they unloaded a pack of robot dogs onto one of the barrier islands. Satellite images have detected
Yeah.
at least 1,000 of the dogs roaming the beach. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's just going to be
Right.
something absurd like that.
Right. Or like a rogue pack of dogs is found in a village somewhere and people are running for their lives because no one knows who's controlling these rogue pack of dogs. Yeah, it's a brilliant future. And it's weird. It's just so strange how like all those like, I don't know, bad dystopian sort of like speculative fiction like Black Mirror. I don't mean to say that it's bad. I just mean like sort of like the obvious stuff is sort of like what we're doing anyway. Just like I mean Sam Altman putting the Scarlett Johansson's voice on her is just so on the money. It's just like, dude, you're just making the movie. It's so weird. Like it's like making it. It's like Elon Musk making a time machine, and of course he's gonna shape it like a DeLorean. Like that's where we're headed.
Yeah, the other scenario reminded me that a future headline, like or a social media trend would be like, I'm sick of all the robot dogs. Like, why can't they build a robot cat?
Yeah,
But
right.
I think that
Yeah.
one of the things you're alluding to is, and I think this has come up in a lot of the news traps recently. The map of the future is full of a kind of absurdity, and our
Yes.
sort of our fearless leaders of private enterprise and government are constantly giving us reason to continually diminish our expectations. And so it's strange because in certain texts it's like the masses are the idiots, and it's the elites that need to kind of produce a technocratic government to sort of stabilize a society that would collapse in and itself from stupidity. But the real truth of the matter a lot of the times is, whatever you want to stereotype about the masses, many of like the important people, and many of the great leaders, they themselves aren't all that impressive. And so once you strip away the groupies and the fangirls and the fanboys, the people who are like the diehards around these cult of personalities, both in politics and capital and sports for that matter, and Hollywood. But once you like take away the people for whom those folks can do no wrong, and you're kind of assessing the leaders of our society, and I think this gets us into our conversation today. I think one of the things that continually kind of shows up in a sort of Marx meets Shakespeare kind of way is that there are really profound and sort of obvious character flaws that are easily visible in some of the most powerful people in the world. And it's interesting to not only track those flaws because of the profound implications they have for not only our way of life, but perhaps life on Earth, and also to see how that trickles down into society.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
one example, the two things that Biden and Trump have in common, we've said this before, is like a messianic, profound arrogance. Like Trump, it's obvious, but Biden, arguably should have stepped down last year. They should have run another Democratic candidate for president, but his fixation on the on the idea that he is the only one that could beat Trump because he's the only one that has produced a kind of Ruth Bader Ginsburg situation in which like the person could have stepped down for the good of party or country and didn't, and appears to be, and with RBG it isn't a necessarily tragic vision because we have, or there's a Supreme Court justice that wouldn't be there. Can you imagine if Alito or whoever it was like wasn't there?
Yeah. Yeah.
And someone else was there. It'd be 5-4 instead of 6-3, but the Roberts would be the swing vote. Anyway, you see where I'm going with this, and that
Yes.
Biden is like sailing into catastrophe. And even now, as you said on a recent news trap, when like the Axelrod and Obama team people and everyone else in the United States is like, dude, you really fucked this up, and like what was behind this. Even to this day, as you said, Biden's sitting there being like, we have more field offices outside Philadelphia than Trump's team. And it's like, you're focusing on the wrong shit, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And it's like, it brings us to our sort of overarching theme today of the quote unquote League of Morons, which is from this film Burn After Reading that came out in 2008. It's a movie I've seen 1,000 times, honestly. I return to
Yeah.
it again and again. It's like sitcom. There's a sitcom
So
element.
funny.
It's like, yeah, it's just a funny fucking movie. And it's a rare movie in some ways in terms of its subject matter. But maybe not its sort of like themes. But I think it fits into a couple of different pieces of art, I guess, for lack of a better term, that you and I have talked about on this show over the years that have that sort of like acid take on American politics. There's Veep, which is
Mm.
more I think about it, it's like one of the greatest shows on television ever
Mm-hmm.
in terms
Mm-hmm.
of how funny it is, but also just like in how deep and dark its politics are. I mean, it just goes down to the core. And I love that about it. There's like, that no hugs, no learning type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the Killing Them Softly, the Brad Pitt movie we've talked
Mm-hmm.
about a few times as just like a really brutal, sort of vision of what America is. But I feel like Burn After Reading is a spiritual cousin to those works in part because it's directly about American politics. It's like takes place in Washington D.C. It's a Coen Brothers movie. For those that aren't super familiar with it, I hope you've seen it. I think it figures into the nostalgia trap universe really well, in part because it certainly informs my perspective on things. It's funny because it's like a Lebowski to me, and it's also another Coen Brothers movie. In that it's sort of like it was taken at the time as sort of just a lightweight Coen Brothers movie after they'd done more serious fare like Fargo or No Country for Old Men, the kind of prestige movies. They did these kind of like weird, very specific comedies that seem like they're about like niche sort of content. And this film, Burn After Reading, fits into there as a film that seems on the surface is just kind of a light comedy, but ends up to me being sort of connected to the vision that you and I have sort of tried to communicate on this show, which is sort of a very dark vision of what not not only the people of America are like, but just like you said, the leadership itself as the League of Morons. And it's such a fucking funny movie.
Yeah, it's interesting in part because it shows us a network of characters from two different classes. And one of the classes is the upper class characters. So you have George Clooney playing this guy named Harry, who's like a former bodyguard for or a federal marshal kind of dude who carries a gun, and he's kind of a sex addict kind of dude.
PP,
And
personal
then
protection.
yeah, and then you have probably the highest up character, which is in scare quotes, uh, John Malkovich playing Osborne Cox, Ozzy, who's like a lower level signals intelligence like assessor for the CIA, who's fired right off in the film, basically because he's like uh, you know, grudgy alcoholic who
Yeah.
probably isn't doing his job very well.
An
and is one of
incompetent drunk.
yeah, yeah, and they're all each character is incompetent in their own way, and then he is married to this woman Katie, who's played by Tilda Swinton, who's having an affair with Harry George Clooney, and they are sort of the reason that the CIA hovers around the backdrop of this film because Ozzy Cox, John Malkovich, has this like former CIA role, and then he's kind of the film. One of the threads of the film is like how he handles uh, what would have been a reassignment to State Department, but he kind of quits to write his memoir, which is how he
Hmm.
pronounces it,
The
and
memoir. Yeah.
to do some consulting that no one calls, for the Cox Group. That's the
He's
phones
his,
in his basement.
yeah, Malkovich's personality is like this impossibly pompous douchebag that sort of has a real sense of like self-importance, despite the fact that it seems like he's useless and incompetent.
Right. And so those characters all suffer from various degrees of deception, self-deception, and arrogance. And we can talk about what that means in a minute. But they float into this working class set of characters. And I think this is important that we're seeing two different classes. Although I think it is relevant that it's all white people because
Yes.
I wouldn't say race is the key to the film, but when you analyze stuff, there's at least a little bit of like of white privilege that not explains everything, but that shades a lot of what we're seeing here. And I think that's one of the reasons why the film is so starkly white.
Hmm.
But this other working class group of characters is Linda Litsky, played by Frances McDormand, who's really the anchor of the plot besides Cox because it's her uh, surgeries, her body plastic surgeries that uh, is the bookend of the whole film, which is she gets the price for the surgeries $50,000, and then at the end of the film she gets the money for her surgeries from the CIA, and part of the film is like how we got from one point to that point.
Hmm.
She's managed at a place called Hard Bodies, a gym, by this guy Ted, played by Richard Jenkins, who's great in the role. And then her coworker is this guy Chad, played unbelievably by Brad Pitt, and him and Frances McDormand, Linda, they find a computer disk of like some of the signals intelligence from that Ozzy has left, and that may or may not include parts of his memoir,
Mm.
and they attempt to blackmail him for it in order to get the money for Linda's surgeries. And that's sort of one of the key points in the plot. And
Yeah.
as they all meet up, like hijinks ensue.
It reminds me of Hunter Biden's laptop a little bit, right?
Yeah.
That there's
Yeah.
like, and it intersects with that world. I mean, it's Burn After Reading. I think has become one of those texts, and if you like start like googling it online, you find like a number of articles written about it that's sort of doing a little of what we're doing here, which is kind of like noticing that Burn After Reading is a text for really like not it's not really a parody. The more the longer we progress into the weird timeline that we're on, where like Trump just got convicted yesterday of 34 felonies, and then the Republican Party is gonna like definitely like nominate him as president, as their presidential nominee, like 4 days after he's sentenced for those 34 felonies. That's like there it's a beyond parody kind of world. Like in other words, Burn After Reading just seems like this is like what people actually are like. And the Coen brothers captured some comedic sort of, condensed movie of it. But in reality, we're in that movie and like we're subjected to the whims of these people who are just like in the background, like trading laptops full of porn and like cocaine and all that kind of shit. It's funny because as much as the Hunter Biden story is sort of like this background thing, it has all the same like sort of like garbage instincts that we're looking at in the Trump world too. In a lot of ways, it's even juicier because Hunter Biden's running around with actual like crack and guns, and there's videos of all of it. It's actually there's a lot more juice in the Hunter Biden story, but for whatever reason, Trump is the one we're watching right now. That may change as Hunter Biden's trial continues in Connecticut. So that may be a news trap story.
Hey, don't get me
Yeah,
started on that.
yeah.
What I would say is your
But
point.
yeah, the point is that they're all like cartoonish.
Yeah. And I think the connection you made to Veep is great, and I want to maybe go back to that at some point. But the more immediate connection you just made to Trump was picked up, and check this out from the Wikipedia page for Burn After Reading. I
Yeah.
went through and I just picked out a couple of choice things to share at various points, but this one fits in right now. It says almost a decade later, the New Republic senior editor Jeet Heer argued that the film was, quote, singularly prophetic of the Trump era, end
Mm.
quote, anticipating, quote, the Trump campaign's collusion with Russian operatives and, quote, the wider culture of deceit that made Donald Trump's rise possible. More than just a satire on espionage, the movie is a scathing critique of modern America as a superficial, post political society where cheating of all sorts comes all too easily. The most disturbing thing about Burn After Reading, though, is how it resembles every day in Trump's Washington, where the line between blundering idiocy and malevolent conspiracy is increasingly blurred. And so I think, it's not just Trump, but that I think that captures a lot of where you're going with that. And
Definitely.
I'm not sure how much I'd agree to the post political part, but I would say that just on that point, there's a moment where Linda and Chad, who cannot successfully blackmail Ozzy for his memoirs, they wind up at the Russian embassy. And little do they know that the guy they're talking to, who's like the cultural attaché guy, is a CIA spy, like who's just
Right.
reporting everything back to the CIA. They call him like their man at the embassy later in a different scene. And so they're saying, look, we have this disc, and we want some money for it. And this attaché guy is like trying to make sense of them, and he's like, look, this is the embassy here. The organs of the state don't operate here. And Linda's like, organs? And then he looks at her and he goes, yes. Like that's just it's a throwaway funny line though, but it
Yes.
captures something. Meanwhile, Pitt still has a bloody nose from where Ozzy punched him and is like, yo, is there a men's room? And then later in the scene, the guy who's trying to figure out what the motive is, he's like, so you are not ideological. And Pitt is just baffled. Chad's baffled, and he looks at me and goes, I don't think so. And like that captures like a
Yes.
whole thing. And so that starts to get at a little bit into who these characters actually are and represent. And
Yeah.
it's political, but it's not partisan. Or
And I
it's not
love that the
ideological.
and I love that the nostalgia for the Cold War hangs over this film. I think that's part of why I'm attracted to it, and part of why we're talking about it on this show is that there's this weird it comes up several times. And just the fact that that the only thing she can think about is to like sell it to the Russians, which seems very old fashioned. It seems like very 1980s kind of shit. And even the CIA itself is like, the Russians? Why the fuck? The Russians? They keep saying it. And like, at the beginning of the film, there's one of my favorite scenes in honestly any Coen Brothers movie. I don't know why it is. It's because of the light. There's a million different things happening. But the scene on the boat where John Malkovich goes and talks to his like catatonic vegetable state father about like how he's quitting the agency. And he does this kind of like fake reverie about like, I don't know if it was the Cold War and there was a greater sense of purpose, but something has changed. We've lost direction. I just love that scene. Something about the blanket on the guy's lap. It seems very like Kennedy. It seems like this is like Cape Cod type shit. But the film engages that like if there's anything to that Jeet here post political thing, it feels like the Cold War in this film shaped people's reality in some way, and we're in some like afterbirth of it where Russia is still around and still exists, and you can still be engaged, but it's in this kind of like degraded sort of like go to the embassy and talk to the spy guy who really just does cultural shit. It's
Yeah.
there's a lot going on in this movie.
Well, I think part of what we might need to be reminded of in that 2008 moment was that we had 8 years of Bush, who, as we've discussed in the Will Ferrell episodes and everything else, he is a very Trumpian figure. And so was Palin, who, if you remember, was already the vice presidential candidate in 2008. And she was on the scene. And so the Tea Party hadn't happened yet. And the reason I say that is because part of the mystification about the fucking Russians, which comes up again when Ozzy's friend Hal
The Russians.
is like telling him what happened in the Princeton club when he served his divorce papers. But part of the reason why that's happening is because clearly the enemy isn't Russia. Clearly, the enemy are like Al Qaeda, and so, but there's no embassy for Al Qaeda, and so the kind of post 9/11 context is hovering behind the film, but no reference is ever made to terrorism or to Iraq. But the Iraq fiasco is also highly relevant here because the culture of deception and deceit and incompetence that we're associating with all these characters' lives was on display with the Iraq thing. You brought up the other day on the show, Colin Powell's fake presentation to the United Nations to secure the coalition of the willing and all that bullshit. And Iraq was founded on this great lie. And so, in the same way that Arrested Development, the TV show from the same era, had this backdrop of Iraq filled with these domesticated characters who are basically all lying to each other and themselves while still a family. In this show, it's not like a family network. It's this kind of a interclass network of peoples who's interested in money and sex. It's a different dynamic. However, the backdrop to the politics is very, very similar. And Veep also emerges prior to Trump and captures a kind of Republican administration that I think, and this is where I would go with it, I think is doing a couple of things here. One is, if you take that commentary, the film is obviously saying the culture itself is producing the lies and deception and the incompetence of the Bush administration. And like, it's coming from the bottom up too. And so it's not just like a top down exercise in lying and incompetence. It's a bottom up exercise too. And that kind of that deromanticizes the kind of I don't know, impulse to regard the working class as the savior of humanity in that kind of vulgar Marxist sense. And that's why it's actually a little bit uncomfortable, and why the interclass set of characters here is provocative. And then I think
that's a common theme in the Coen brothers' work. I feel like is this sort of like they show the venality and sort of evil of everyone, and it's just sort of like that's what I find attractive about their work. I think in part it's sort of like they're not willing to like find easy victims. Instead, they're sort of like investigating how everyone can be corrupted. It's sort of like that. To make any connection to the Lawyers in the Attic podcast I do, it's sort of like the idea of voluntary manslaughter says that like even a reasonable person could be brought to killing by like extraordinary circumstances, and it feels like the Coen brothers are interested in that dynamic, sort of like when the like sort of reasonable person is somehow brought to doing and having the power to do chaotic things. And that's part of like what happens in this movie.
Yeah, and that's well said. And it's interesting too that the movie is essentially pre-social media.
Yeah.
Because the weaponization of data is still occurring on the CD drive, the CD-ROM.
Well, there's the dating app that's happening, and it's very it's not like Tinder. It's much more like,
well, it's a desktop app. It's a desktop exercise. She's on the laptop looking for men. So it's exactly that era. But it foretells a lot of the things that come up that are relevant to sort of the kind of data piracy that has shown up on the show, and that we can steal from the headlines.
Oh yeah,
as it is.
The CIA stuff. I think is really important. I mean, the film is bookended by these sequences, and then has throughout, which are some of the funniest sequences in the film. Honestly, are just these like inside the like fluorescent lit, hard tiled offices of the State Department, the Pentagon, and places like that. Talking with the J.K. Simmons plays the guy that sort of is the head of whatever. He's like the manager of whatever wing of the CIA that's like answering to all of this stuff, and just it's. These scenes are funny because they're like men, mostly like white men in suits, who are all sort of like being yes men to each other, but no one knows anything that's going on at all. And they're also like how sort of casual they are about covering everything up. It's like, what? There's a body? Burn the body. Get rid of it. Like they're just sort of like very flippant about monstrous things that they're doing in order to cover their tracks. And those scenes, I mean, it's like, God, what a vision of a nation. What a vision of like the CIA. It's like I kind of connecting it to like the 1970s films that like the CIA is just this like hyper um intelligent, super evil, sinister organization who has its like eyes and ears everywhere. And here we get like the opposite of that. The CIA as like a bunch of bumbling fools that can barely figure anything out. I love it. It very much
Yeah,
fits a post-political age if that's the theme that's there.
yeah. I mean, the flip side of the bottom up moronness is that the top down incompetence is also there. I think the critique of that would be when this comes out, like the CIA is running black sites and is you know
They're closer to
doing
the 70s films, is what
yeah,
you're
yeah,
saying.
help, yeah, yeah, shipping people to Guantanamo Bay. Yeah, and so that the critique is that the film's comedy sort of humanizes the intelligence agency almost to an uncomfortable degree, given the fact that these guys are committing crimes.
Right,
So you have to take the tension and work with the tension because no one text can do it all, obviously.
right,
And
right.
so it's important at this moment where people do associate the organs of the state with such sinister exploitations. The Coen brothers are kind of there reminding you that the bureaucracy is actually full of uh, idiots too, and also that in some ways the agency of intelligence doesn't even understand the state that it serves, by which I mean it can't understand its own people. So part of the thing that befuddles these people is the CIA guys and like the senior describing is as one says to the other, we're trying to make sense of it. And J.K. Simmons is like, what does it mean? And the guy's like, his other officer says to him, well, we don't know what anyone is after. And to which J.K. Simmons, the boss, is like, well, this Cox guy, how much do we need to worry about him? And the guy's like, oh, he's level 3 clearance. And so J.K. Simmons just shuts the folder and he's like, oh, no big deal then. Meaning all the stuff that Cox, so all the stuff that Cox has been saying to himself and to others is founded on delusion. And so that triggers this, us to flashback briefly to the scene on the boat you described, because as he's sitting there, and you learn later that he doesn't really have that much to say, but as he's sitting there, he's telling his dad, the Cold War is over. There's no more mission. And then he says, it's not like when you were in the State Department. And he says, I'm writing a memoir and it's going to be pretty explosive. And it's like, dude, that's so wrong, because you also find out that he was at the Balkans desk. So at best, he was interpreting signals intelligence, like phone calls they picked up from the Balkan countries during what, 20 years earlier, the Yugoslav war. In other words, no one cared about that, and no one cares about it in 2008. It's the old news. There won't be any explosiveness at all. And he's like, Katie has had trouble accepting this. Katie, his wife, Tilda Swinton, because every time he tells her he's writing a memoir, she either laughs in his face or she's like, "Oh my God, no one wants this."
Yeah,
She's
like
just brutal.
who would want to read that? Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and,
that's
and
the connection we should get to, the sort of relationship stuff, because that's what a lot of this movie is about, and what drives so much of the plot is the characters are engaged in um divorces and marriages and like I guess like what it was like internet dating sexcapades throughout the movie.
right,
Right. And it seems like that's like what, and at some point, that officer brings that to the CIA guy, brings it to J.K. Simmons, says like they all seem to be sleeping with one another, and like he's like, please spare me, like I don't need to hear that. In other words, it's like just taken as a given that like this is what's really happening.
well, I read that a little differently. One, remember that was the shit that J. Edgar Hoover used to
Yeah,
keep things in check. He
true.
he he stayed in power for longer than anybody else, because the fucking is actually where the secrets are, and the secrets are actually how you control behavior and stay in power. And so in some ways it's because J.K. Simmons and the CIA are so stupid that they're not interested in the sex, because sex is the actual that's the card to play. And so it's interesting that sex and money are things that they don't understand as well. they have money. They give her the money for the surgeries later. Like, oh, if that's all this is money, that's not the problem for them. What's interesting is that they only appear in the film after Harry shoots Chad in the closet because Chad was there trying to discover more data that he could give to Linda that she could use to try to sell to the Russians, but he winds up in Ozzy's house while Harry and Katie are having their affair. And so he's in the closet afterward when Harry gets back from his run, and startled Harry shoots Chad in the head. But that's when the CIA, because the CIA is interested in violence, and violence they understand. The sex they don't. Now the sex is the foundation of so many of these relationships, as you say. And that part of this I think is actually key too, because if you think about the internet dating stuff on the one hand, and on the other hand, hard bodies. And so the gym is this space where you're supposed to be able to create value for the self on the market. And actually rewatching this film a couple times recently to have this conversation with you made me realize what how sex works in the marketplace of capitalism. Like it's an obvious point, but when Linda's sitting there at the beginnings telling the insurance company who's denying her coverage, like, I need a complete reinvention of myself. Like, and then she later tells Ted, I've gone as far as I can go in this body. Like, she understands something that's actually profoundly axiomatic about our capitalist society. And in many ways, to me, this film is about the soul of people under capitalism, to riff off of Oscar Wilde's famous book about the soul of man under socialism. It's she gets something really, really true, which is, if you are a hard bodies worker, you have fallen into a trap. But if you can remake your body with money, meaning you have to take the capital, the 50 grand, and invest it in a body that would be able to essentially be for sale on the dating marketplace in order to attract a guy who, in her words, is like funny, but also kind of successful. Harry kind of fits that picture a little bit, because she wants the dream, which is for her like economic security and a can-do guy,
Yeah, right.
guy
Positive
who,
guy.
yeah, a positive guy. And Chad fits only some of those qualities,
Yeah.
who can like give her the American dream that she wants, which requires her this refashioning of her exterior self.
I love
And
that.
then,
I never really thought about the gym part of it. Like, why is the gym in this movie?
and that's part of what makes the Pitt character so compelling, is that it's Brad Pitt, and they
I
kind of,
got his number. I got his number.
yeah, and it's also like he's so goofy looking that they almost desexify him.
Yeah.
But he plays a kind of Ken doll, which is it's a really interesting antecedent to Ken. But
Yeah,
he
it
plays
is.
a kind of Ken doll, and he
There's a
has
weird like
this
androgyny to him. It's weird. Yeah.
he um and he has the physique, and he has like a version of what he thinks is the look, but there's nothing else there. And so he is this kind of hilarious guy. One side note, uh listen to this. This is from the Wikipedia page about when Pitt met the Coen brothers to audition. And it says Pitt, who plays a particularly unintelligent character, said of his role, quote, after reading the part, which they said was handwritten for myself, I was not sure if I should be flattered or insulted. Pitt also said when he was shown the script, he told the Coens he did not know how to play the part because the character was such an idiot. There was a pause, and then Joel goes, "You'll be fine."
Oh, wow.
So I thought that also kind of got
Yeah.
at something.
Yeah, because I mean, think about the character that Brad Pitt plays in True Romance, the guy that's like sitting on the couch that's like condescend to me, motherfucker, kill you, like that guy. He's a
Yeah.
really stupid guy. I mean, that's I think Pitt actually captures that really well. I mean, the film, I mean, Linda Litsky is really dumb in this, and yet and she's kind of like a Jerry Lundegaard, the character in that she's actually that Frances McDormand is actually pursuing in Fargo. Like these kind of like I don't know cheery kind of personalities that are somehow engaged in this monstrous shit because it is her. Like she's the one that makes the leap to essentially trying to blackmail or extort this guy. I mean, she sees dollar signs immediately and goes immediately to criminality, and she's the one that escalates all of it and arguably gets all these people killed. And she's the one that gets away with it at the end too. Like she kind of like walks away with her surgeries, and she succeeds. It's a bleak story, man.
And at the same time, like all the kind of hustle culture stuff that you reference on social media,
Yeah,
it's a logical extension of that. It's just a bit of an exaggeration, but the part of the undercurrent of so much historical success in America, to borrow the famous line, is behind every great fortune is a great crime. Chris Rock used to riff on that 20 years ago, and that's what is also the unspeakable part of all the social media, passive income, hustle culture, crypto bro mentality, is that on some level, in order to beat the game, you have to speculate. And we've talked that to death about the whole crypto bro culture, about speculation and investment, and how it's really just a way to get men out of hourly wages work and out of the cost of college. It's supposed there has to be a way to shortcut a path to the American dream. But
yeah,
this is
dude.
all
That there is so
American.
much of that. Those I watch those kind of finance bro YouTube influencer videos sometimes, and it's always some guy walking around like a mansion, and he's young, and he's like, if you're working like in this way, you're just a bitch because you're not making your money work for you. You know what I mean? And like he talks about his life as like a sort of like just producing content based on leisure in a way, and sort of like look at all my free time, which is exactly what you're saying. Like there's a sort of like liberation, and the person who like works for somebody else is like the lowest form of life, and that seems like it's very American bootstrap ideology.
Well, and that is the perversity of being in a society that's founded solely on individual striving. Like you can tell that in these people's lives, there's no church, there's no community, there's no party. Everything is about them and what they're going to be able to accomplish. And that's the kind of profound selfishness and also superficialness that's at the heart of a lot of like influencer wellness culture that is visible in our society today, in which
Mm-hmm.
everyone is trying to capitalize on self improvement. And what's really strange is that in the film, almost everyone is a hard worker, from Harry to Katie to Hit and
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
Chad and
Chad.
Linda.
Yep.
Everyone at Hard Bodies is working pretty hard. Ozzy might not be working all that hard with his drinking over at the CIA for that's why he gets canned. But there's this hard work, but there's also this sense, and I think this is part of the critique, that the hard work isn't fulfilling. And I think this is part of why we are shown the working class characters and the upper class characters, is because at the center of Harry's life is like a fucked up marriage that he's not fulfilled by. And so he's chasing women the way that Ozzy's chasing shots in order to try to fill up the hole inside.
Mm.
And he's deceiving his spouse, and he's deceiving the women he's sleeping with, which he has this like script that he says to every single woman. He's on repeat mode.
Well,
Um,
hello. Yeah.
yeah, look, I'm going to be fully transparent. I'm not wearing a ring, but we're not yet divorced. And the whole thing's a lie. So then, right when he's about to sleep with Linda, he's like, hey, transparency is my MO. And then they start making out to go have sex, but that's a lie. And so there's this deep core irony, very similar to Veep, in which the characters are very aware of some of the things that they have to do in order to succeed in society, which is to have a body if they want to attract the right people. And you have to
That's
attract the
right.
right
Clooney is
people.
running all the time.
Yeah.
Clooney is constantly running. And what is he building in his in his garage? What do we make of that part of the movie?
Well, it's interesting because it's, he's obviously building a sex machine, and that's what he devotes himself to. So at one level, it's just a symbol of his life. His whole life is about sexual fulfillment, and the running is a way to keep him attractive to women so that they'll continue to have sex with him, because he knows that if he lets himself go, he won't be as successful on the dating market. And then what's interesting is that the thing he produces is sort of like an autonomous machine. It's
Mm.
it's a it's a it's a weird form of a child. Like, it's interesting that none of the characters have children. We're not privy to any children that are in the characters
That's
that they
right.
have. The
Yeah.
marriages have been unproductive in terms of childbearing.
They're producing
So
careers.
yeah, and so the thing that he's made is this replication of himself. And what is it? It's just a dildo attached to a lever because that's him. There's nothing under it all. He's a dick, like literally a dick. He's a fucking guy, but he's also a dick. Like he's an asshole. He's empty. He's a body without um he's a body that doesn't allow himself to really have that soul
Mm.
because he's in denial about certain parts of himself. Another key to that would be that he's almost like this half automaton, is that he keeps saying never discharge my firearm, but through all my training it's a second nature, it's an instinct. He repeats that through the film
Muscle
when he
memory.
shoots. Yeah, it's muscle memory. When he finally shoots Chad, he's unaware that he did it.
Yeah.
He shoots him, screams, goes to the kitchen, gets a knife. The only reason he would get a knife is because he's unaware that Chad is dead. Hello? Goes back into the room. What the fuck?
I killed a spook.
Right. And so the same guy who invents a dildo machine that is an extension of him is also the half automaton that can shoot a man without realizing. In other words, it's the unconscious desires. It's the unconscious lizard part of the brains in operation here that are driving the plot, not necessarily the conscious decision making part of the brain. And then the last thing I'll say on that is there's this element of the big children that is part of it. So when he finally calls his wife, I think her name is Sandy, and he tells her to come home after the book tour. She's like, "Oh, my little Harry needs me," like, and he's like, "Yeah, Harry needs you," and like, you get the real sense that this is Arrested Development, this is Peter Pan shit, this is Will Ferrell territory. He's just a big oof, oaf, excuse me, yeah, but oof, goof, oaf,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then you get the sense that this is where the white privilege comes in too, that the security and the class privilege and the money, the kind of nest of capital that these rich characters are able to make for themselves has degraded them. The achievement of the material dream hasn't done them any favors for self-knowledge. And the reason, this is what's on the other
Yeah.
side
Yeah.
for Linda Litsky. She's going to get everything she wants, just like Harry did, just like Katie did, just like Sandy did. And in the end, she's going to keep dating. She's going to she's going to keep trying to fill the hole inside with other bodies, but it won't work. And that's the irony of the working class characters, that they're all searching for vaguely similar things, but
Yeah.
just at a lower class level. But achieving that class dream isn't going to actually, make you happy, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a very different take on class than you typically get in quote unquote class stories. You know what I mean? That are just like kind of straightforward, like here's how the working class is fucked over. There's something more devious at work in Coen Brothers' work, and that's not to say that they don't have like a kind of, I don't know, I think they're liberals. They have like a somewhat progressive vision. At the same time, their artistic vision is so bleak, and this is 2008. This is before the Obama era, which is, when you contrast the Obama era to the Trump era, and I know like you can get into really like broad and maybe even meaningless sort of generalizations about presidential eras defining the zeitgeist, the cultural zeitgeist. But it does feel like there was a different moment in the Obama presidency and post Obama that in other words, like Trump has given us a kind of lens to look at Obama, if that makes sense. And you kind of like see the same Veep shit on both sides. In other words, like I like Jeet here in the New Republic describing, Burn After Reading as a text that captures something about the Trump presidency and the Trump administration. But I think it's a little wider than that. I think the film is not an attack on just general Republican politics. It feels like this sort of cartoonish venality and like kind of vapid, I don't know, weird chaos that controls things, that scares us, that's present in the Democratic Party as well. And it feels like it's just I don't know. I think people just look at it in different ways, if that makes sense.
I think part of the Marx Shakespeare or queer Marx aspect of this too, right along the lines of what you're saying, is that when you take that wider scope and you think, okay, what other like political figures would fit into Burn After Reading? Bill Clinton, 110%.
Right.
Ronald Reagan, 110%, although for slightly different reasons.
Hmm.
Kennedy, 110%. And this is what hits on the Veep thing too. The chaos you talk about, that some of that weird force is sexuality, like almost as a deep drive of the society, and that part of what produces a chaos that the intelligence agency like cannot understand is that there are different ways for individuals to try to fill that hole inside. And to fill that hole, they often have to deceive themselves and others. But that hole can lead to combustible situations for the society. Clinton and Lewinsky, Kennedy and Monroe, Trump and Stormy Daniels. But also think back to how Hoover tried to blackmail Martin Luther King. I mean, they had King's affairs on tape. So even King, like at the heart of the civil rights movement, was having sex with other women.
That's what's
Um,
crazy about like Zuckerberg and company owning all of our texts and owning everything that we've been doing, because it seems like a sort of like Marvel supervillain move would be to like turn that stuff against the population. And I think it already kind of happens on the individual level. Like people get this is like the whole that they've already had to pass laws about revenge porn in part because of this sort of thing, which is like, oh, I'm going to use your past sexual escapades against you. I'm going to tell your friends, blah, blah, blah. And like the idea of exposure. I remember Connor Habib, who has a podcast. I had him on the show a couple years ago. He had a show about this where he said, like, the only answer to this, the only answer to this, like, would be to like somehow create a culture where shame isn't as operative, where you could actually have your sexual secrets exposed and nobody cares because it's something that we all accept as human. I mean, it's quite a utopian thought, honestly.
mhm.
But do you get what I'm saying? Because it
Yeah.
feels like that's what chance do we have against surveillance networks that know everything about us and everything we've ever Googled and everything we've ever texted and emailed to anybody? That's scary, and I think everyone feels scared about that in part because everyone has secrets.
Well, yes. And I think that part of those secrets are founded on, for characters like this, uh, it's founded on people who are trading in deception and deceit in order to make something more of their own life. I mean, that's ultimately what it's about. Is it's saying to us, and this goes back to the hustler culture too, that the self actualization process that is the bare bones of capitalist society, in which the individual is supposed to maximize their potential, their earning power, their possibilities. That's what everyone is after. Is that life? It's all over social media. That life is
Hmm.
all
Oh yeah,
over social media,
yes.
and part of the way that you have to do that is that it takes a lot of uh, uh, labor, all kinds of labor, waged and unwaged labor, and that the some of the things people end up doing in the name of themselves as the crux of a civilization that says you're the most important thing here, is is they have to become uh, monstrous people. And so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
here's one last thing I
They
found
have
here.
to become clickbait warriors of themselves,
Yeah,
essentially. You have to like
yeah,
make it so that like in the same way that people are attracted to a TikTok video or something to like let their eyes stay on it for a long time, human beings have the impulse now to like try to create themselves as that same clickbait impulse. Stay with me and click on me. Even like swipe right on me or whatever the fuck. You know what I mean? Like it's all about sort of like creating that self that is liked. That's why I sent you that George Costanza thing. I must be liked. Everybody must
yeah,
like me.
yeah. Well, and that honestly, I think that's a core part of Californication, as we've talked about it on the
Uh-huh.
show. And okay, so listen to this. Here's what the actor said. This is my last thing I got to tell you. Here's what the actor said about the movie. Swinton described Burn After Reading as a quote, a kind of monster caper movie instead of the characters, quote, all of us are monsters, like true monsters. It's ridiculous. She also said, I think there is something random at the heart of this one. On the one hand, it is really bleak and scary. On the other, it is really funny. It's the whateverness of it. You feel at any minute of any day in any town, this could happen.
Mm.
Malkovich said of the characters, no one in this film is very good. They're either slightly emotional or mentally defective, quirky, self aggrandizing, scheming. And let me just point out one thing, and then I want to apply it out because I realize we're closing in on our hour here. Just to take Katie, the Tilda Swinton character, for a moment. At one point, I think she's talking to Harry, and she's getting a divorce, and she's trying to convince Harry that he should get a divorce because they're going to wind up together. And she's a very domineering and sort of cold person who calls Harry's wife Sandy a cold stuck-up bitch, and then when Harry's with Sandy, she calls Katie a cold stuck-up bitch. Kind of a weird image.
And he
And also,
winces at both times.
yeah,
Like
because he's in a weird like
it hurts him to hear it both
yeah,
times.
yeah. Freud called it repetition compulsion. Like
Yes.
that's Harry, and and then as Harry's trying to dissuade Katie from immediately divorcing Ozzy, she's starting to take his hesitations as a sign that he doesn't want to get married to her and he doesn't want to get divorced from Sandy. And he's reassuring her, and he's like, hey, you and me are rock solid. Like another lie that Harry tells, and she's like, he says that he doesn't want her to hammer him. And she's like, I don't think I'm hammering him, as you say. And then she bangs on the table really hard. She goes, I don't hammer, while she's screaming and hammering. And so that shows that in every character, if you just look for every character's moment of self-deceptive irony, that's the moment of transparent irony where you're like, this person, as like successful and, ostensibly attractive as she is also completely blind. And it's so blind that it tells you something very important about certain individuals, but especially people who have accumulated power.
Yeah.
That there's something anesthetizing and numbing about achieving success. And so this goes back to capitalism, the American dream. Sometimes the price for winning is that you lose sight of yourself. The price of success is blindness.
Yeah.
The price of comfort is numbness. And so, okay, what's an example of that?
Ellen DeGeneres is who I'm thinking of, weirdly enough, because she became a monster, and everyone said it was just pure power. She's just throwing coffee at people and what the fuck, and like she became like a psycho, and it was like, where did this person come from? And sort of like as she got more and more powerful and more insulated and more yes people around her, and it's like I don't pick on her individually. It seems like a template that's from her to Harvey Weinstein, honestly. It's like they all fucking become just like these crazed assholes, in part because it's like the only way they can feel anything. It's a common theme in fiction, honestly. It is that Mark Shakespeare shit, honestly.
Yeah. And it also shows you that once you're in that position and you have that blindness, a lot of other things get swept up into the black hole. And so here's an example as well from real life. Like AI, just to take one we've all been talking about. They've spent tens of billions on it. You can't even keep track of how many billions have been spent on it. They've touted it as the future, as you've said, and everyone understands who listens to this show. And yet there are aspects of it that is kind of hits back to what Tilda Swinton was calling the kind of like the bleak, dark absurdity of the movie. Like the AI stuff is like the HBO show Silicon Valley. It's so easily satirical. And so I'll give you one example from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Many large language models fail basic tests, often in amusing ways. Like, here we go. Google advises adding glue to pizza, for example. Copilot highlights the risk of being eaten by a cabbage when asked how to cross a river with a goat. So it's like, stuff that you're familiar with.
It doesn't work as well as Google, honestly.
Yeah, it's just stupid. And not every query is stupid, but the point is they've created something that they have invested a lot in socially, politically, emotionally. Imagine the teams of really high-paid bureaucratic tech workers who are developing this. Imagine all the congressional staff in DC right now who are advising senators like, hey, we need to subsidize more fucking chips and get some green energy to power the chip factories so we can make more power and chips for this industry. Like the United States is saying, we're going to give state subsidy support to shit that says, hey, why don't you add glue to pizza? Like
Yeah,
it's
right.
fucking batshit
It is.
crazy. And so if you say there's something about success that makes blindness, and then you look at that through a class lens, the hard part isn't saying the other classes are incapable of blindness. The blindness is through everybody. However, the rich and the powerful have more resources, have more money, and their actions have more effects and consequences for the rest of us. So it's the blindness of the powerful that is actually more dangerous than the blindness of the middle class and the working class.
Right, right.
Because our mistakes just harm each other. They harm our families, they harm a stranger, they harm the people you kill in your car. The mistakes that are being made above us are fucking up the entire society, and you can't even talk to them in a reasonable way about how stupid they are and it sounds, because they've got their credentials, they've got the house, they've got the car, they've got the clothes, they've got the paycheck. So this whole like AI bubble, and the other thing that you just talked about with Sam Altman, this dude is a fucking liar. He fits right into Burn After Reading. Just like
Mm-hmm.
he's the
Mm-hmm.
Harry character. This
Totally.
guy is you have to think at some point, kind of like Adam Newman, the old guy from WeWork. On one level, they know what some of their doing is a lie, but on another level, their self-deception is so clear that they can't actually behave the way that they're behaving in some sense without knowing that they're also just they're
They're
in
they're
they're
they're passengers in their own bodies.
yeah, they're in unconscious drive mode.
Yeah.
Unconscious drive,
I
just
heard
like Harry or Chad or whatever.
I'll get his name wrong. This TikTok influencer that just got convicted of murdering his wife, just found guilty yesterday. He said that I felt like I was a passenger in my own body. I was watching myself, murder her and murder her lover because I caught them and I was so enraged by it. Anyway, they convicted him of first degree murder. But that idea of like the autopilot thing is really scary. It's come up in a number of murder trials that I've looked at as now that I work at a law firm, that like these people that have killed people are like, I was on autopilot. It wasn't me. I was watching myself. I was in a dream. There's all this sort of like separation. That interests me. That's part of like what feels like is happening in this movie and is happening in real life. And the thing that I would just sort of wrap up on that I'm thinking about as kind of directions for the future. 2 points. I love the Tilda Swinton, both bleak and funny at the same time, because it feels like that captures the zeitgeist of our age and our moment right now. As I'm watching like Trump get convicted of these crimes on the same page of the New York Times as like Biden okays Ukraine to attack inside Russia, and like all that kind of like wormhole shit we talk about, where it's like these escalations of things happening, and it feels like we're sleepwalking or on autopilot, and so that like bleak and funny at the same time is really captures it because it's so hilarious, yet it's so fucking dark, and that's why I think these acid pieces of fiction like Burn After Reading really resonate with us, because it kind of captures that and lets us know that other people see how scary and funny it is at the same time. But the other thing I wanted to say is that hustle culture part of it really connects. That hustle culture, how deep it is, wellness culture everywhere. It's all individual. It seems like it totally benefits like a conservative, right wing, Republican Party sort of ideology. It doesn't benefit a Democratic, like old Democratic Party progressive vision of like community unions, all of us together. It's all for yourself, and it seems like that sort of, as that becomes the kind of like dominant common sense of the culture, that it's all for yourself and like self-improvement kind of shit. That's present in those fucking Nazis that you sent me over there in Germany that like are gaining attention. That guy like Coen, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
The dude that's like, his language is totally like TikTok. Like he is a TikTok influencer, and like his language is totally about like taking care of yourself and not really depending on others. So the idea of like, I don't know, welfare and social security and state health care and all those things that like have been like progressive visions for a long time are in total tension with the dominant culture. And I think that's what I'm pointing out. And that's just another place where it's bleak and funny at the same time.
Yeah, my last call and my final response is just to that would be the irony of that and of National Socialism was the state will provide for you, but just not for them. Like
Mm.
we won't provide for the Jews, but we'll provide for the Aryans. And so that the hyper individualism is actually cathected to a strong state. And
Interesting. Yeah, you're right.
on that line, remember, Linda Litsky didn't succeed at blackmail. She didn't succeed at most of her hustling. But when she finally did, where did the money come from? The state. The state provided the core capital for her to become what she needed. And I'll let that irony just settle as my final word.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's literally like the last thing that happens in the movie is they're like, how many surgeries? And like, it doesn't matter. Just pay for it. Just pay for it all.
Just pay it. And it's weird because they're paying her to keep their secret.
Right.
So the irony is just A plus.
Secrets as having that market value.
Yeah. And then also in a surveillance society, sometimes part of your bargain with the state is to not call out the horrible shit the state does or knows about, the violence, the buried bodies. And you make that bargain because you know that's the same state that pays you.
Oof. Well, Burn After Reading, highly recommended if you haven't seen it. I think I've watched it twice in the last 2 weeks, honestly. It's always hilarious. It's so funny. Thanks, Justin. I always appreciate your analysis. And we'll talk to everyone next time. I'll be back with more News Trap episodes next week. If you haven't subscribed, you can do so at the link in the episode description. Thanks, Justin.
All right. Thanks. Nice seeing you.
Later.